right. Good morning, Board of Directors of Apple. We are Apple's ethical team, and today we want to take up a topic of concern that we have found in regards to the smartphone industry, and Apple is an innovator in that industry, and we want to bring up a topic that I think we as Apple can make a difference for the society as well as the country in regards to cell phone usage. So a little bit of background first I want to give you into our company. And Apple has reached $1 billion in sales in 2016. That is a staggering number, whopping number. I just want to give you a little background. You know, the cell phone only came into existence, 20 years ago? And in that time, Apple has become a defining character in the tech market. Apple has always been an innovator, and it is the leading innovator, as we all know here. As of 2015, approximately 50% of American adults own a smartphone. That is a staggering number. And of that number, a lot of them own Apple phones. And so we here at Apple have an obligation to address certain moral and ethical concerns that are plaguing our company as well as the smartphone industry as a whole. A growing audience of researchers and media outlets are acknowledging that iPhones are contributing to cell phone addiction among their consumers, and that smartphones in general are doing this as well. I want to just take you into a number of headlines that were recently put on different major media outlets in regards to the effects that our smartphones have on the general populace. Here you can see heavy smartphone use can lead to depression, anxiety, different mental health effects that are very, very negative. As you can see, more and more of those, and look at the dates of them, 2017. So this is a very timely matter, one that Apple can get ahead of now versus later. As you can see, number of mental health side effects that are negative and that Apple has an obligation to address. So I just want to give you a quick overview of addiction. Now, the American Association of Psychology defines addiction. I want to give you the acute definition of what addiction is according to the American Association of Psychology. And that is a complex condition, a brain disease, that is manifested by compulsive substance use despite harmful dependence. And what we're seeing among the populace of the United States who are using one of these smartphones is there is a staggering amount of dependence on their cell phones. And that is something we as Apple need to address. So the psychology community avoids the word addiction and labels that as substance use and dependence. So going off that aspect, dependence is overuse of something. It is being overly dependent on the certain item. So behavioral addictions are accepted in the psychology community. That is something that can be addressed by psychologists and that can be fixed. And adolescents, as we all know, in a certain number of different items, adolescents are the most susceptible and most vulnerable to be affected by mental health effects, and those are the people that we need to target the most. Oh. Go ahead.
Okay, so continuing with the addiction, there are two forms of addiction, and that's physical addiction and behavioral addiction. And like Sagar stated, the smartphone, when you're using it, that's a behavior. And the behavioral addiction, as defined in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual for Psychologists, is a failure to resist an impulse, drive, or temptation to perform an act that is harmful to the person or others. And when people use their smartphone, for example, in some activities such as driving, they're consumed in it and dependent on it and not being aware of the surrounding environment around them, which is potentially dangerous not only to them but to other people, other individuals. And in addition to that, before you perform the action, you have a feeling of tension. And after you perform the action, you have a feeling of gratification or release of tension. And it's basically just a drive reduction that behavioral addictions cause. And in addition to that, over time, the amount of pleasure that you get doing this action decreases, but it's already habitualized and your body desires the urge to act upon it.
with increased addiction to smartphones, there are a lot of long-term health risks. While we don't necessarily think of smartphones posing health risks, there are some, including physical and mental health risks. In terms of physical health risks, many people complain of headaches, tremors, and finger discomfort. But most of all, there's a lot of upper body tension in your muscles and tendons and related tissue. And this is mostly due to the fact that smartphones are not ergonomically designed. For ergonomics to keep us having good posture, we're not going to be looking at our smartphones up in front of our faces like this with our backs up straight. Rather, most users use their smartphone down by their chest, looking down with their shoulders hunched. And in doing so, growingly over time, posture worsens and a lot of tension is built up in the upper body muscles, which can be which can show as serious health effects in elders. But more importantly, smartphones pose a mental health risk. A study done by the National Institutes of Health defines 3 types of smartphone use behavior: intentional use, habitual use, and dependent use. With intentional use, it's checking an email, using your phone for an intended purpose. Habitual use is more along the lines of using your phone before you go to bed, going back to it at certain times of the day, every single day, like a habit. With dependent use, this is the more severe one. These are the people that say, oh, I can't live without my smartphone. And most dependent use is connected to intense social media use. And that's usually present in people with poor social relationships and low self-esteem. And dependent use can lead to a problematic overuse, which is connected to a number of mental health disorders, including anxiety, insomnia, depression, interpersonal sensitivity, and an unhealthy lifestyle. When it comes to this problematic overuse, many people feel a loss of face-to-face interactions, and this is then connected to feelings of loneliness, depression, and isolation. And with college students in particular, smartphone overuse is connected to a number of mental health disorders. And the 4 most prevalent are depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, interpersonal sensitivity, and anxiety.
And so although we're talking about behavioral addiction, which is something that may seem abstract, there is a physiological change that is happening in the body when we are performing this behavior. And that is when our smartphone or device sends us a notification, there's a release of dopamine in the brain. And dopamine is responsible, if you look at that diagram and that pathway, this is called the mesolimbic reward pathway. And basically it's activated when you experience any sort of reward. So eating, sleeping, doing exercise. And in this case, as done in a study via MRI, this pathway was activated when someone received a text message. It released a sense of gratification to them. And the way these notifications from these applications are received are known as something called intermittent token reinforcement. And basically what that is that the reinforcer is sent to you at random. And once that's sent to you, that releases gratification and dopamine in your brain. And that form of reinforcement has been clinically proven to be the most effective in continuing behavior. And this isn't only in humans, this is in rats, pigeons. It's basically ubiquitous across animals. And ultimately, what this does is lead to increased usage and increased dependence on the activity that the organism is doing. And that's what notifications like the smartphone is inducing within us.
The biggest health risk posed by smartphones is road safety. With an increased ownership of mobile phone devices and new in-vehicle communication systems, some of which are designed by Apple themselves, are a huge threat to road safety. And the threat is due to distracted driving, which is a rapidly increasing behavior. Now, distracted driving can encompass a number of behaviors, including not having your hands on the steering wheel, eyes not being on the road, but the biggest behavioral risk is cognitive distraction. Having hands on the steering wheel and still having your eyes on the road, your mind might not be there because you're using your cell phone. And the problem with this is you're not aware of what's going on in your surroundings. And in doing so, you might have increased reaction times, the inability to stay in your lane, or shorter following distances, which then lead to statistics like these, where at any one moment, anywhere from 1 to 11% of drivers at one time are using their cell phone. And as a result, using your cell phone while driving makes you 6 times more likely to get into a car accident than when you're intoxicated. And as this builds up to about 1.6 million crashes every single year from mobile phone use while driving. And this is mainly because the time you're spending with your eyes not focused on the road is increased by 400% when you're using your cell phone.
So there's a few ethical considerations we need to take into account before we decide if Apple actually does need to make an action on this issue. And that is the fact that a lot of the times item manufacturers say that, we're just fulfilling the needs of our consumers. We're giving them what they want. But in this case, Apple has marketed and created this need within the consumer to use their device. About 15 years ago, we didn't even know the possibility of a cell phone or everything it could do. And until Apple introduced this to us, then we learned that, oh, this is an additional part of our life, and this can be an additional part of our day, and it re-socializes us. So now there's evidence appearing that suggests that, maybe this new form of socialization or this new need created by Apple is causing some serious health effects such as depression, OCD, or anxiety. And because of that, since they place this need in their consumer base, they have an obligation to inform their consumers about the potential consequences of what this marketed need could do.
So you may be asking yourself, why should Apple be the company to address this issue? And the answer to this is a variety of reasons. And I'm going to start off by discussing how Apple primarily makes its money, as you well know. Most money is made by selling its products. So in the first quarter of 2018 alone, 70% of their revenue was accounted for by iPhone sales. And additionally, we're not going to look at companies such as, or software companies such as Facebook, Snapchat, or Netflix that have apps on the platform, because it is through these companies that they want to keep the user engaged, to keep them hooked on the product of their application, of their social media service. They want them to spend as much screen time as possible on the platform. Furthermore, Apple owns the best app marketplace. It's superior to Google Play Store in that it generates more revenue for these app developers. So it's a market that that app developers want to access. And it is because they own this app store, because they can control what goes on the App Store, that they can have a set of guidelines and rules that the developers must comply to in order to be on the App Store. And we're going to expand that to include certain guidelines for or to prevent smartphone addiction or to lessen the addiction. And furthermore, we're going to have users are going to have the ability to report manipulative design within the apps if they find it. Okay. Continuing on why Apple should be the company to address that, other companies imitate Apple. So, for example, with the introduction of the iPhone 8, they eliminated the headphone jack. The next year, despite mocking the elimination of the headphone jack, Google removed their headphone jack with their newest product, the Google Pixel 2. And furthermore, just with the introduction of the iPhone 10, as you can see here, with the most recent Androids ever released, a lot of them are copying that same notch design, even using it as a marketing technique for saying that they have a smaller notch. So companies look up to Apple in terms of design, and design itself is held in high regard. And the original 1977 marketing campaign, Apple used the phrase, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." And so that just shows that they consider design to be a hallmark of their marketing. Furthermore, Apple has already had stakeholder outcry. In January, 2 shareholders called on Apple to address the issue of children becoming addicted to the smartphone. And while Apple has replied that they care about their consumers, they haven't really done anything to change the software itself. Additionally, we have Tony Fadell, who remarked who was an original designer of the iPod and the original iPhone, and he has moved his field into specializing in reducing tech addiction and fixing design in tech. Finally, we have Apple's CDO, Chief Design Officer, Johnny Ive, even admitting a problem in stating that too much use of the iPhone could be labeled misuse. So the Chief Design Officer does acknowledge that there may be an issue. Furthermore, we want Apple to be able to capture the markets that Google has already been able to take a part of. So with their release of the Family Link, they have the ability to allow parents to control their children's usage, and Apple doesn't really have that so much yet. And furthermore, there's already a self-aware market, so there's already a market for apps that track your usage, such as Moment, and they can try to help the users. So people are already acknowledging that there's a problem, and they want to do something about it.
All right, so what physical changes are we proposing to you, the board of directors? We want to do two changes mostly, and those are batch notifications and alert system. So going off what Emilio said earlier, there is this theory of fixed interval reinforcement, and that is where they will batch up your texts, your messages, your alerts, and they will send them to you in 30-minute intervals. Now that gives you, because you're not on one thing and it's not a random stimuli that is being presented at you, you can then get those things in fixed intervals and therefore go forward in focusing and moving on with your life rather than being slugged into a certain condition where you're just going from app to app to app and losing focus. An alert system is also an option, and that will notify users when their time is exceeded. On the next slide here, I kind of give you an idea of what that kind of looks like. So there's this convenient alert to notify users to have physical interaction with others. And what that alert will do is be just like any other text message, any other alert you get on your phone. It'll just be like, get up, go socialize with people, go and have some physical interaction, as that's healthy for you. Also, what we're proposing is a 1 day of socializing that we have seen in various other means, with children especially. There's this thing on Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon where they have a day of device-free day, no TV. So what we're proposing is a day where you can say no socializing via phone. Go out, go have some physical interaction with someone else. So we're also proposing a disclaimer. And so what that disclaimer will do is it's going to be a package alongside a brand new iPhone. It's going to be a little slip of paper, and it's just going to give you a brief explanation of why the cell phone might be a little bit addicting. So this gives you kind of a little mock-up of what that disclaimer will look like. We care about you as a consumer. We always want our consumers to know that we care about them, using our product. But we want to address the studies that have been shown that excessive cell phone usage may lead to addiction, may lead to overdependence, and that they should go interact with other people. They should go have physical contact with other people and have that interaction. So we see this in other industries too. We see it in tobacco, as you can see. We have a picture here of what the Surgeon General warns. We see this in alcohol, drink responsibly. We see this in all sorts of industries. And I don't want to vilify it, but we also see it in everyday products. We see it in spray paint, just anything that might be a little bit harmful. We want to address that, and we want to get ahead of that instead of after the fact. So Apple has been known to be an innovator in marketing. We are the king of marketing when it comes to our products. and we want our products to be profitable. At the end of the day, we want our company to profit, and we want us to reap the benefits. But we want to do this in an ethically sound way. So who are we targeting? Who are our target audiences? So all smartphone users. We do know that all smartphone users, based on the studies, are affected by the mental health effects of depression, OCD, anxiety, that both Akshita and Emilio touched on in their parts of this presentation. So we want to target the general populace as a whole, but more specifically, we want to target a niche group of people, and that is society's most vulnerable. That is children. And so if we can target this product at parents ahead of time and tell them, get your children to go socialize with other kids, that might be beneficial to our product because we're getting ahead of it and we're going to society's most vulnerable, the kids who are more susceptible to brain issues, so because they're going through their own growth phases, so they're going to be going through that psychological growth in terms of depression, OCD, anxiety, and be more susceptible to those conditions.
So overall, we want to address the fact that this is going to be profitable for Apple in the long term. While there will be expenses, there's going to be coders that are needed to add these software changes. There's going to be a division of the marketing department, is going to need to advertise these changes and make sure that the consumer is aware that we're doing this for them. We're trying to tackle the issue before it becomes a real national health concern. Because overall, we want the marketing Apple makes the majority of its profit from iPhones. So marketing more just means more iPhones, which means more revenue for the company. So the current investment is overall going to lead to future profits, even though that there is going to be small expense now. Next, we want to establish that there is no real legal dimension. It's a newly developing issue, and so there's no clear legal precedent. No laws or cases have been specifically filed about iPhone addiction or smartphone addiction in overall. So Apple must ask itself, do they want to self-regulate for marketing purposes and overall benefit the company, or they want to wait until the law forces them to comply? We suggest that it should be for a marketing purpose, that they can spin it as a competitive advantage over other companies. The connection of the banning of cell phones while driving is somewhat connected, but it's more so about inappropriate usage of the iPhone. And this is manageable rather than an addiction that people have become habitually dependent on.
So when we, the ethical team of Apple, comes to you to propose this, there really is something to say about the integrity of our company. Our CEO, Tim Cook, says himself, Apple has always been different, a different kind of company with a different view of the world. It's a special place where we have the opportunity to create the best products on earth, products that change lives and help shape the future. It's a privilege that we hold dear. So that's why we're here to you, Board of Directors, because Apple has a moral obligation to live up to this claim of our CEO. And in doing so, and not dismissing the potential health effects of smartphone overuse, including depression, OCD, anxiety, Apple is taking care of its consumers, changing their lives, and helping shape the future, just as Tim Cook said. There's a level of integrity within the company, within the industry, and by consciously making these proposed changes, Apple's addressing these emerging studies and getting ahead of the game, getting one step ahead to really help shape the lives of their consumers.
And thank you. What's the relationship between Apple and the app developers? Because it seems to me that when I go on, I see all of these homegrown apps. A lot of them are free. And why are we responsible? Why are we putting the burden on ourselves as opposed to on the app developers? We don't create these repetitive games. There's a third-party vendor involved. So are you suggesting that we create a standard for the vendors? And if so, what what are the legal ramifications, the ethical ramifications of that?
So, just to touch on the first part of your question. So, as far as the App Store, we get it that, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, when you use it, you get like drained in and you get drawn into them. So we do understand, but as the company that is facilitating those apps on our App Store, we have an obligation to kind of regulate what is put on there. Instead of letting every random, app be used, I think that what we can do as a company is put regulations on the App Store itself that, there's this sort of code that you have to follow, kind of like a Bill of Rights, I'd like to say, in that, what's it called? It's saying that, this is what you have to follow along with, and these are the rules you have to abide
Are we
by.
gonna audit them? In other words, are they gonna have
Well,
to submit their
yeah.
game or whatever, and we're gonna say no go?
Yes.
That already happens right now. So if you look at the Apple App Store or App Developers Guidelines, it's 16 pages of guidelines and regulations for what they exactly have to do. For example, it can be really specific minutia. So if you look at your apps on your iPhone, for example, none of them change faces, with the exception of Apple's own clock app. So the example that they gave, Apple itself, was that a weather app can't change its app icon. So it can be something really specific, or like app icon depending on the weather. So if it's rainy. So it can be something really specific like that, but we're just asking them to overall change their design because it needs to comply. So there's already standards in place, and they're just going to need to comply.
So to clarify what I said about the Bill of Rights, I meant clear-cut instructions that are saying, look, we want these apps to be less addictive for people, so you got to follow these guidelines as to how you are going to format your app and create your app for the consumer, for the user, to best benefit them in a way that they're less drawn in.
Let me ask you another question. Who and how reads the little pieces of paper that are inside the box of the iPhone and the iPad? Why are you proposing that, other than the fact that it's going to cost us money to print them? And if I remember correctly, the founder of the company was obsessed with packaging, right? Steve Jobs was into everything had to be minimalistic. You throw another piece of paper in that no one is going to read. You didn't propose putting warning on the outside of the box where it might be patent. Why not?
So that is definitely a viable option, but when we were talking about a disclaimer, we were saying that we would put it directly on top. So when you open the package, right up on top, the first thing you're going to see when you open that package and your phone is right there on the plastic thing, you're going to see that notification that says, this item is is potentially addictive, and
To build off of the design aspect that Steve Jobs was so obsessed with, it's a small, simple white sheet of paper with 2 to 3 lines, not like a directions manual that's covered in
I
text.
understand, but I'm going to take that and throw it into the garbage immediately because I want to get hooked on my iPhone and I need to use it. So how does that accomplish anything?
I suppose it's your option as a consumer, but we're trying to address it in the first place. So the fact that consumers can become available is what we're really trying to do, or aware of the issue.
another option that we do have is that in any Apple product, you guys get those little stickers, right? Everyone wants to keep those stickers. As far as the little stickers of the Apple, right?
Oh,
that you get with the products, correct?
Right.
What we can do is on those stickers, everybody always keeps those, right? They're not throwing that away. They always, it's an add-on. So what we can do is put the warning right on those stickers that, cell phone use, be careful when you're using it, and go from there.
Now, you talked about children and having that day of rest off the phone, right? Except that we're all business people, right?
Mhm.
We have to be in touch all
Yes.
the time. This 30-minute business, if I can't be in touch with my client and I don't even get the notification for 30 minutes, something catastrophic can happen in the meantime.
Yes.
So what right do you have to be paternalistic as to that?
So exactly. That's why all of our changes are optional, but the changes are default into the iPhone itself. So those badge notifications, yes, that if you're a business person, you could opt to turn that off. But the reason why we have it defaulted into the system is so that it's tackling the problem of the phone, what it's doing just like naturally with the intermittent token reinforcement. It's changing that into more controlled reinforcement.
But every time we get upgrades,
Yes.
it goes back to the default, like behind our backs.
Well, not
Things like that.
necessarily. I mean, it can be installed into the iCloud services so that every time that you re-download a software, it can automatically update. So for example, I most recently upgraded to the iPhone 10 and the background of my phone was already changed. So there's already software that's within the iPhone by Apple that enables certain settings to be
Why
rolled
not
over.
have this disclaimer, if it's so significant, every time you turn on your device and you get a home screen, why didn't you recommend putting the disclaimer on the home screen every time you turn it on? Warning, this can be addictive, like to try to create a different type of reinforcement.
So Sagar briefly had mentioned, just as we get a notification for the social campaign of using your phone less on one specific day during the summer, something else that he briefly touched on but didn't elaborate on was the idea, in the same way that Netflix, if you're watching for a long time, sends you the notification to, oh, you've been watching for a long time, do you want to keep watching? And so that way, if mobile phone users have been on their phone for like elaborate periods of time, a notification will pop up. Are you still using your phone? Do you want to put it down? That way they can be more aware.
So there is still within the phone, there's going to be a form of letting the user become aware that this may be an issue.
Yeah, and the thing is we still want our consumers to use our product, right? So that's why we have the notification appearing after usage, just as a reminder and a disclaimer.
And finally, on a more aesthetic note, Apple's home screens are very neat and clean, and we don't feel as though, or we thought that Apple would not like this intrusive message to appear every time, just in terms of aesthetics. Like
You mean that we wouldn't want it as the board?
Yeah, if you're looking at the design of the iPhone, you don't want something intrusive to appear
Every time
time that you
your
open
phone.
it, which is why we're going to have it appear when you first get the phone so that they're aware, and in times that we feel as though the addiction has become an issue.
So I enjoyed the presentation. I really appreciate you bringing it to the board. And as a board member, I find this to be a compelling marketing and PR presentation versus an ethical presentation. I see value in potentially, playing with various notifications, disclaimers in any sort of way, whether it's printed or on the screen or whatnot, so that we're in line with other industries. You mentioned alcohol and a couple others that have disclaimers. That all makes sense. From an ethical perspective, I'm not convinced. I feel that children, have parents at home, family at home, or whomever around them, and those individuals, I would hope, would guide them around how to socialize and how to interact. And I don't think that it's a corporation's responsibility to impose that on how children are raised. I think it's one aspect of it that can be influenced through various kinds of marketing and PR. And I certainly think that as a marketing presentation or as a strategy, this might be a way to go forward so that we continue to improve our image and continue to show that we are aware of how our products and services are impacting people's daily lives. I see that as a marketing and PR strategy and not as an ethical strategy. And so I just wanted to ask for more clarity around your stance on what is the ethical dilemma that you're putting forward.
So the ethical dilemma here is that the item was introduced and it was something that was given to the public. And Apple is the one that created it and facilitated it, and now as a result, there are studies that are popping up showing that our product is leading to these specific consequences. And because of that, because that Apple as a company placed this need into their consumer base, by being ahead of it and being one of the top innovators, they're being innovative in a new way in the sense that, we're caring about our consumers and we are trying to remedy a problem that we placed in them initially.
Sure.
And it's, yeah.
I would also say that, in my opinion, innovation comes from need. And I'm sure that 12 years ago, or however long ago, when this technology was formed, it was in response to consumer need or a market need or something that was identified as something that the public would find interesting. So I would argue to say that I don't know that Apple was solely responsible for putting this out there per se, rather than responding to, oh, here's an opportunity where consumers are needing to access information in a different way, whether it's a desktop computer, they need it mobily, or whatever it might be. So I'm not
Needs
seeing that.
change with time and with
Right.
technology, and so with Apple facilitating the introduction of a revolutionary type of phone, they are almost they started the introduction of this type of addictive product, potentially addictive product that leads to things like depression and anxiety. And so the ethical dilemma here is that Apple may have been the start of potential problems, and that's a new need arising in the industry to address the mental health effects, which are often overlooked. And by Apple taking claim and saying we care about our customers, they're addressing this ethical issue where they may have caused mental health issues in a lot of their consumers.
I totally agree. I completely see that. I just see it as a building awareness as an organization from a marketing and PR perspective to say we're aware of how our product may be impacting our socialization. And so therefore we're putting it out there that we're aware of that, and we're putting out guidelines to say like, hey, like this is how you might tone it back a little bit or not, look at your notifications as much. Again, I see it as more of a marketing and PR stance versus an ethical.
To touch on the marketing aspect, yes, we are going to go heavy marketing, and that is a big aspect of making this issue known and getting people to know about it. But as far as what specific things that we coming to you as the board of directors to fix, things that are ethically objectionable, that would be the changes in the software that make it less auditory, visually, and tactilely addicting, to make those regulations for the App Store, to make those, and that's not something you can do from a marketing standpoint. That's something that us as your ethical team have to come to you, board of directors, and say, these are the physical changes that we have to make. So yeah, we are going to go heavy marketing. There's no doubt about that. There has to be people have to know about this issue. But we are addressing the fact that we have to make changes to our software, to our guidelines, to various other aspects on the App Store to address the problem of the addiction and to remedy those problems and make it less addicting for the people.
Now, the Fitbit has this interesting feature, which is that if you're sitting for too long and doing nothing, it will start to vibrate. In other words, to tell you get up and walk around. Why, instead of this paper notification and everything else you're suggesting, why don't you just suggest that the techies design a vibrating tool so that it vibrates and that's the sensory clue. You've been on for a long time. You've been playing this game nonstop, as opposed to doing something else with the phone or getting up and walking around.
Yeah.
Why don't you just do it that way?
That is 100%. That is 100% an option. I mean,
So why not? Why aren't we doing that?
That's why we're coming to you as a board of directors to present the aspect as a whole. Yeah, to have that conversation of how we can make those changes. I
saw it with the alert.
with the alert,
That's
you you are touching, but
Good.
if we want to go, away from the whole paper aspect, paper in a box aspect, we can have that option of technologically addressing that issue, and that, if you have an Apple Watch, it can say, oh, don't look at your, they'll get the buzz and don't look at your phone, if those things are synced. So it is an option, and that's why we're coming to you to make those changes. So, to have that.
How much would it cost to have this alert added onto every phone?
I would
I mean, what's our cost of
I mean, we-
manufacturing the
we-
phone, or what's the cost of the?
Fairly minimal.
Yeah, it's a
It's
software.
just-
It's a software. It's like just like when you update an app, it would be it's just a software.
Basic code. So
Yeah.
if, for example, you've been on your phone for 5 hours, which you could just say,
With an iPhone, the battery is going to
So like, if user has been on their phone, if it's been awake for 5 hours, then you could just say have a notification pop down. That would be very simple to encode into the machine.
So our number one competitor in the manufacturer of smartphones is Samsung. Do the four of you have, in your research, did you identify anything that Samsung has or has not acknowledged in this ethical issue?
All right. Well, we're board of directors. Well, Apple has always been a major player. Samsung's gone through its own issues, as we know, with exploding phones and whatnot. But what's it called? Being the number one, we know that. It's statistically proven. Apple, as a company, is the number one cell phone manufacturer. And as Patrick here said, we are the device brand that is going to set the standard for what other companies follow. And so when we make those changes ourselves, we're not just helping our consumers, we're helping the industry as a whole grow to meet the expectations of our consumers from an ethical standpoint. And that's what our job is, to make those changes and to have that change in code, in software, in making those issues available to the consumer to know and to fix and to remedy those problems, so that it can be create an industry-wide standard.
To answer the question of whether Samsung specifically has done anything, we did not find anything in the research. So it's going to be a competitive advantage for Apple to tackle this issue before them.
While Apple specifically never copies a new feature of Samsung, at least not directly in the way that all of the Android users have, that's where Apple has that competitive advantage. By making these software changes and sending those notifications, they're already one step ahead of all of the competitors.
And also, if you don't mind touching back on your ethical component of this, if you look at the amount of people using an iPhone, which was around 50 in 2015, 50% of American adults, and then you have this big population of adolescents and teenagers, adolescents, and children that also now have these devices, the iGen, the newest generation of people coming into their adulthood. If there's research showing that this device is leading to depression, anxiety, OCD, and especially since that children's minds are more plastic or mental, yeah, in the sense that they are a lot more susceptible to these negative effects. A lot of adults were introduced to the smartphone when they were adults, or like when their brain was more solid, so they weren't affected as much. And if you have this population that is coming in and it's causing this, then their standard of life will ultimately be a lot less than the current generation that exists. So the ethical situation arises there, in which an entire generation, their standard of life is being facilitated via a product to be lower than the previous generation, because they were more susceptible to this product when it was introduced to them.
And following that, if parents aren't privy to the matter, right? If parents aren't privy to the matter, they're not going to be able to do anything for their children, right? So that touches on the marketing aspect. But then going one step further, with the changes in the software, with being forward about how we're going to get ahead of because we've seen that nowadays what's happening. Companies like Facebook, like other companies are not telling, you know, the consumers of what's happening, and you see what's happening in our day and age now. We want to have transparency. We want to get ahead of this problem. Let the consumers know what we're doing ahead of time so that we don't have to deal with the ramifications, the ethical ramifications down the line where, you know, Mr. Cook is like Mr. Zuckerberg now sitting on Capitol Hill trying to, you know, do that and, you know, fix up a bad situation.
As we said, we want to self-regulate before the law forces us into a
Right.
box.
And you had mentioned how, oh, it's the parents' responsibility to make sure their kids are not getting addicted to these products. A lot of times, especially with the iPhone, you have the top 1% using it, and you have like the bottom, lower income people also using the iPhone. And in doing so, you have people that may not be as educated and may not know the potential mental health risks, right? And
Totally right.
that's why the PR campaign is so important to address the ethical implications.
I think we're set.
Okay, I don't have any further questions. I do have